You found it. It's the real news with your host, David Knight.
All right, let's talk about the sheriff here. Also breaking late on Friday was 4 of Sheriff Scott Israel's deputies waited outside the high school during the shooting. And the Coral Springs Police Department sent 130 officers to the scene. They put their lives on the line, reports Zero Hedge, while the Broward County officers simply waited for backup at the scene as it unfolded, and what some Coral Springs officials perceived to be a dereliction of duty, but not the sheriff. The sheriff, who is responsible for the people that he hires, the people that he trains, the buck really does stop with him, but he says no. He says, if the deputy didn't have the heart to go in, that's not my responsibility. He said, I gave him a gun, I gave him a badge, I gave him the training. If he didn't have the heart to go in, that's not my responsibility. Well, you know what? There's a lot of us that don't see it that way. A lot of us believe that maybe we could get a sheriff who takes responsibility for the actions of his people. They call him Broward's cowards in the National Review, said he refuses to go quietly, so he should be shown the door by people that he professes to serve. It is an elected office, by the way. 23 sheriff's calls involving the Parkland shooter, 18 sheriff's calls involving the shooter's behavior directly. They did nothing throughout all of that. So this is a pattern of behavior that calls into question some other things. Now stay with us. When we come back in the next hour, we're going to have an individual who is trying to get the government to actually do studies on these SSRIs, because whether the guy was a patsy or whether he was a lone shooter, SSRIs are a part of that issue. As a sheriff, I need to be here to hire more deputies. We're going to put deputies all over the schools, like those deputies that stayed outside and did absolutely nothing. 4 of them. 4 of them. It was bad enough when it was just 1, but it was 4 of them. Everybody that was associated with the sheriff's department that was underneath this Sheriff Israel did nothing. It was the police department that showed up in massive force that did something, that went in. The other people were just waiting for backup. They weren't going to do anything. And his response is, we need more people like my deputies. Well, whether you do or not, he should not be the one who is hiring them. And quite frankly, if we're going to turn our schools into a fortress of uniformed individuals, that's not something that we can afford to do. One of the reasons that so many schools have allowed teachers who otherwise are trained to carry guns in their schools, like here in Texas, and we're going to get to that. One of the reasons that they did that here and in Arkansas and other places is because they didn't have the money. What they're talking about, some of these schools that they've held up as examples and say, look at this school is a fortress and it is absolutely terror-proof. Yeah, right. And they spend $500,000 to $1 million in addition to the cost of the school to do that. Are you going to do that when we have to be the world's orphanage here? Where we have to educate all the children in the world who wish to come here, no matter where they're coming from or in what numbers, and we have absolutely no say about that, but then we're going to turn all these schools into a fortress? We can't do that. It's a stupid, it's not a practical solution to this problem. A more practical, more cost-effective solution, but also a solution that would actually work, is to have teachers like the teacher who gave his life, even though he was unarmed, he took the bullets. If he had a gun, he could have done something about that. But no, we have, because of people like Joe Biden and George H.W. Bush, we have a imaginary gun-free zone. Yeah, how'd that gun-free zone work out? It's a defenseless school zone is what they have created here. Let's listen to what the Broward County Sheriff said when he was asked whether or not he would resign.
No, of course I won't resign. It was a shameful letter. It was politically motivated. I never met that man. He doesn't know anything about me. And the letter was full of misinformation. I wrote a letter back to the governor. I talked about all the mistakes that Hager made in his letter. It was a shameful, politically motivated letter that had no facts. Of course I won't resign.
Of course he won't resign. He doesn't know me. He never met me. You know what? I haven't met him either. But I know that if he's presiding over a police department that has more than 24 times been notified of how dangerous this individual is and doesn't do anything, and then even as the shooting is happening, they're standing outside, not doing anything. then that's all I really need to know about this guy. And it's not just Hager. It's not just the governor. We've also got the Florida Speaker, Richard Cochran, says suspend the Broward County Sheriff for incompetence for dereliction of duty. Absolutely. He's presiding over a totally incompetent sheriff's department here. Now, the governor has called for a probe, but not for the sheriff to be suspended. Meanwhile, we have other survivors. This is a student, Kyle Kashuv, I think is the way you pronounce the name, one of the students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, said, it absolutely outrages me that CNN town hall, we had the sheriff who was virtue signaling against the NRA and against guns when he didn't even act properly. He didn't do his job properly, and then he turns it around and says guns are the issue when he failed to act properly. That's exactly what is happening here. If you're not going to accept responsibility, then step down because you're not capable of doing the job. We'll be right back. Stay with us. I'm David Knight. Welcome back. In the next segment, we're going to have a constitutional attorney who is calling for a federal investigation into the link between psychotic drugs and school shootings. And it's about time. Because whether or not this kid was a lone shooter or whether or not he was a patsy, the drugs are at the center of this. I said this from day one. That's why I focused on the drugs. The drugs kill quite a few people that are not even using guns. A lot of people commit suicide or kill other people, and they don't use guns. So therefore, we shouldn't worry about that, right? Just like we shouldn't worry about MS-13 killing people, hacking them to pieces slowly. You know, we had a story over the weekend of a deranged individual who went into a library, attacked a 20-year-old girl, just repeatedly started stabbing her. Apparently didn't know her from what we see here. She's just sitting there reading a book. But even if he did know her, okay, he's using a knife, 10-inch knife. I think a 77-year-old man tried to intervene. He got hacked up pretty bad, but he didn't die. The young girl did. The 20-year-old girl did. Is that okay? Should we not worry about that because that's not guns? You know, that really wasn't picked up by the national media because it didn't involve a gun. If it had involved a gun, you can bet that it would have. If he had gone in there, shot her to death, and then shot the man who tried to stop him, who then survived, it would have been a national story. But it wasn't a national story because a knife was involved. As I pointed out 4 or 5 years ago in China, you had a group of guys go in with knives, killed 33 people, severely injured more than 100. But we don't have to worry about that because it's not a gun, right? It's okay if somebody hacks you to death. Frankly, I would rather be shot than be stabbed repeatedly. But let's talk about what's going on with the sheriff and with the Broward cowards. I played the clip for you where the sheriff said, of course I'm not going to resign. There's absolutely no reason I should resign. These people in the state government who are calling for my resignation, my investigation, they don't know me. They don't know anything about me. Yes, we do. We know you presided over a police department that did absolutely nothing before and during the shooting. But you want to build your little empire because that's the first thing you did. You said, oh, we're going to hire a lot more deputies to stand guard. Well, they were standing guard, all right. They were standing guard outside. And then we have an individual who is a high school student and who deserves to be heard, as CNN would say. So why doesn't CNN listen to this high school student? Here's what he had to say.
Should be, and it absolutely outrages me that CNN town hall, we had the sheriff who was virtue signaling against the NRA and against guns when he didn't even act properly. The armed officer at school waited outside, and then the sheriff and his men for 4 minutes let my classmates die while he sat outside and waited. He didn't even do his job properly, and then he comes around and turns around saying guns are the issue when he failed to act properly.
Evidently, there is at least reporting that he knew during that town hall, and we're talking about Sheriff Israel, that he knew that his deputy had waited outside and didn't disclose that, as you pointed out.
Not just one. We found out after this it was 4.
He says he's not going to resign. He says that he's had amazing leadership at his department. You agree with that? Where does the buck stop on this?
No, not at all. I think he absolutely needs to resign after what happened here. He failed to act on so many different levels, and him himself, he's responsible for this massive failure. This could have been easily stopped, both by the FBI and the Sheriff's Department, had they acted.
Yeah, he knew all of that. He knew that it wasn't, he knew not only that it was one deputy, he knew there were 4 deputies out there. Because immediately after that, the police department said, the truth is going to come out about this, that there was another department that did absolutely nothing. But of course, you just heard a high school student there, Kyle Kashuv, I think is the way you pronounce the last name. But David Hogg defends the coward officers. This story that's up on InfoWars, who wants to go down the barrel of an AR-15? In other words, I don't blame him. He's a good person at heart. He just couldn't go up against an AR-15. So don't blame these guys who put on a uniform, who did the training, who were standing there with a gun to do exactly what he didn't do. Don't blame him. He's a good person. He has a good heart. It's the gun. It's the AR-15, according to David Hogg. See, this is why when CNN is out there saying, coaching David Hogg, and we showed the video, and then they said, oh, we're going to get YouTube to put a strike against InfoWars for showing that video. A lot of people have showed that video. A lot of people have shown the video and commented on it. But of course, only InfoWars gets a hit for that. And it's an issue if you look at this, that CNN is obviously coaching him. Whether they wrote the stuff for him to say or not is beside the issue. They're telling him, go ahead, you can try it again. Go ahead, try it again. No, that's all right. We got time. Go ahead, do another take. Do another take. They're not a real news organization, folks. And the NRA is saying that the Broward County Sheriff, you were the one who didn't protect these children. The NRA said, no, Sheriff Israel, you were the one who didn't protect these children. That is your job. You run, listen to this, the largest fully accredited sheriff's office in the United States. Oh, so obviously the issue is that we need more deputies like this, don't we? Maybe the answer is less quantity, better quality. And that might start with getting rid of that sheriff. So, yet your office failed this community, the largest accredited sheriff's office in the United States. And of course, it had many tip lines to them, to the FBI, telling them, and now they've released a transcript. It's been reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. Many people have now reported on it. One caller, they redacted the name, but they referred to her as she. So we know it was a female who knew him, said, you know, it's just so much. I know he's going to explode. Clear conscience if he takes off and just starts shooting places up, because I've now warned you about this. But of course, they didn't do anything about it. Nothing at all was done about it. Also mentioned that he dressed up as a ninja or as an ISIS fighter as part of that caller transcript. Said he's been thrown out of all these schools because he would pick up a chair and throw it at somebody, a teacher, a student, because he didn't like the way they were talking to him. All right, now it's time for a newsflash, folks, something you may or may not have known. And that is that as much as we criticize these Broward cowards, the Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly that the police have absolutely no duty to protect the general public, in spite of the fact that it says to serve and protect on the side of the car. They don't have a duty to do that. They don't have a duty. How many people are asking the question, what can the government do to protect the people? Asked the Tribunist.com. However, did you know that the government, specifically law enforcement, does not have any duty to protect the general public? You might assume that this is some new decision from the Supreme Court. It's not. The most recent time they upheld this idea was back in 2005, but it goes back to the early 80s. 1981 was the first time they did this that I've seen in the review. It's long been the court's stance that essentially the American people are responsible for taking care of their own personal safety. Now, if we go back to 2005, there's a ruling from the Supreme Court. The government doesn't have a duty to protect you, even if you've obtained a court-issued restraining order. And it was the New York Times that covered that ruling in 2005. They said the Supreme Court ruled on Monday that police did not have a constitutional duty to protect a person from harm, even a woman who had obtained a court-issued protective order against a violent husband, making an arrest mandatory for a violation. The decision overturned a ruling by a federal appeals court in Colorado. The appeals court had permitted a lawsuit to proceed against a Colorado town for the failure of the police to respond to a woman's pleas for help after her estranged husband violated a protective order by kidnapping her 3 young daughters, whom he eventually killed. See, when we take guns away, it's going to be the older people. It's going to be the women who are going to feel the imbalance of power the most, because she was relying on the police to protect her. She had a court order. She thought the police would enforce that. She thought the police would protect her. Didn't happen. 1989, another case, found the same thing. The decision was DeShaney versus Winnebago County, held that the failure by county social service workers to protect a young boy from a beating by his father did not breach any substantive constitutional duty. Going back to 1981, Warren versus the District of Columbia, two separate cases. The District of Columbia and the Metropolitan Police Department were found negligent failure to provide adequate police services, but they said no, because these individuals, like you, don't fit within a class of person to whom they have a special duty. You understand? They're going to look out for the powerful people, not you. All right, I was just talking about how the Supreme Court has ruled multiple times that the police have no duty to protect, even when there are protection orders out. They say, yeah, we knew that. We were called. We didn't do anything. You think it's bad here at this school shooting? Yes, it is. But it is a pattern of behavior for which the Supreme Court has, over many decades, 1981, 1989, 2005, has always said that they have no duty to protect, no legal responsibility to protect. And so, as this article, the Tribunist points out, why is it then that the same government that says that they have absolutely no duty to protect the general public, why is it that they work so hard to take away your right to defend yourself? Good question. They're going to leave you absolutely defenseless against criminals, rapists, murderers, mass murderers, terrorists, because you don't, and here's the court decision, you don't fit within the class of persons to whom a special duty was owed. That's what the court said. So they owe a special duty to some people, but not you. Not you. You're not in that special class. You can't violate national security rules like some of the people in the special classes can, like Hillary Clinton. And you're not going to be protected like some of the people in the special classes can. And then, of course, there's all the billionaires pushing gun control who have their own private security, their own walled compounds and so forth. They like gun control because it takes it away from anybody that they think might eventually be a threat to them. But, of course, there was that clip that came out over the weekend. I just read you one of the Supreme Court cases here where they said that the police did not have any duty to protect the woman, her 3 children who were kidnapped and killed by her estranged husband. We had the liquor store clerks who had the ability to defend themselves. A couple of women attacked by a man with a shotgun in a liquor store. They defended themselves. You can see the story and video on Infowars.com. Adon Salazar has the story up there. They said, I'm not even sure how he got away with his life at this point, says a police officer. And they said, we are not going to be victims. That's what the women said. None of us are going to voluntarily be victims. We're going to fight this. But as we look at this, and as we look at the stand down, it goes a little bit perhaps beyond the idea that the police have no special duty to protect people. The Gateway Pundit asked this question. Were the 3 Broward County deputies outside the school shooting given a stand-down order? Were they told deliberately to stand down? When the Coral Springs police officers arrived, they could not believe what they saw. Many officers were surprised to find not only that Broward County Sheriff's Deputy Scott Peterson, the armed school resource officer, had not entered the building, but that 3 other Broward County Sheriff's deputies were also outside the school and had not entered. Coral Springs Police Department told CNN the deputies had their pistols drawn. They were behind their vehicles. The sources said not one of them had gone into the school building. And so Gateway Pundit asked the question, how likely is it that there were 4 cowardly deputies all standing outside the school during the madman's rampage? How is it that the neighboring police department officers were the first ones to enter the building? Neighboring police from Coral Springs released an interesting statement the day after the shooting. They said the truth is eventually going to come out. They said, I understand another agency has given the impression that it had provided the majority of the rescue efforts and that the tremendous work of the Coral Springs police and fire departments has not been recognized. Please know this issue will be addressed and the truth will come out in time. Well, the truth did come out. It came out on a Friday evening, which is where you go to bury information in the news cycle. And they finish up and say, every police officer I know would not hesitate to assist a child in danger. Were the Broward County deputies, therefore, given a stand-down order? That's a good question. It's a question that needs to be asked, whether or not CNN and YouTube want to shut us down? That's a question that needs to be asked. And here's a video from a teacher who was there, who helped to shelter kids. So she's a hero teacher. And this is what she had to say. She said the shooter was dressed like a cop in full SWAT tactical gear. Here's that clip.
Begun.
I was about 2 feet away from my door. All of a sudden I heard gunshots in the stairwell, which is about 20 feet away from my room. And then kids were screaming and then running back towards me and towards the end of the hallway. So I just went in this very strange autopilot mode where I pivoted on my feet. I unlocked my door, and then kids just started pouring in my room. I don't know how many kids were in there, but I was pulling them and getting them in and shouting at them to get in the room. And then I suddenly saw the shooter about 20 feet from me, standing at the end of the hallway, actively shooting down the hallway, just a barrage of bullets. And I'm staring at him thinking, why is the police here? This is strange, because he's in full metal garb, helmet, face mask, bulletproof armor, shooting this rifle that I've never seen before. I don't know when I decided it was the right time to close the door. I grabbed the handle with both hands, and that's when I got nicked.
Notice that the ABC reporter didn't ask any follow-up questions when she said that. You would think she would question that.
As I'm closing my door, I'm shouting at my next-door neighbor, Mr. Scott Beagle, to close his door. And he's the kind of man that would just keep that door open a little longer. You know, he's all about the kids, you know, but he couldn't see the shooter. I had a good visual of him, which is why I yelled at him to shut his door now.
And of course, she goes on to say in that interview that he did not shut his door. He couldn't see the shooter, and he was killed along with several people in his classroom. A couple of individuals shot in her classroom. The window was shut out. But she said the gunman was dressed in full SWAT gear, firing down the hall, and, dressed in helmet and so forth. And yet that ABC reporter never mentioned that. And you look at the lower thirds, and it says, she was hero Florida teacher speaks out, was grazed by a bullet while shielding students from the shooter. Doesn't say anything about that amazing statement that she had to make. That was noticed by True Pundit, and that is an amazing statement, an amazing statement. That needs to be addressed, but let's not pay any attention to that because we've got a narrative to sell here. ABC, the legacy media, CNN, very aggressively pushing a narrative that we are not allowed to question. We're not even allowed to question a sheriff, all of whose deputies did nothing before and during the shooting, did nothing. And so the question is why? Why didn't they do anything? Certainly they'll say, well, we don't have any responsibility to do that. The Supreme Court has said that 3 times. But maybe something else is involved here. Are we allowed to ask that question? You should be asking that question. You should be educating yourself, not only about this, but about the dangerous SSRI drugs that are pushed along with this fake narrative that we get from these people all the time. That is something that affects millions of people, and you should be asking questions about that. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight.
Introducing Icarin, a 30-day liver and kidney cleanse, exclusively available at InfoWarsLife.com. We have set out with top researchers and developers to bring you the strongest, purest, most potent, documented system for your liver and your kidneys. There are 2 different formula blends in one powerful capsule. It also funds the InfoWar, a total 360 win. Icarin, available now at InfoWarsLife.com.